Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our continuing series of Know Your City here in Waltham. I am just so delighted to have Dr. Brian Reagan with us this evening. Dr. Reagan joined the Waltham Public Schools as superintendent last summer in July. And before coming to Waltham, he served in Bedford as a high school assistant principal, in Shrewsbury and Hudson as a high school principal, and most recently he was in Wilmington as an assistant superintendent. He began his career as an instrumental music teacher, and I had the pleasure of asking him what his favorite instrument was, and I found out it was the trumpet. And are you going to entertain us this evening?
I wasn't prepared for that. Maybe next time I'll do a little concert for you.
Dr. Reagan graduated from Waltham High School in 1990, and he holds a Bachelor of Music degree from Boston University, a Master of Educational Administration from the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and a Doctorate of Education from Northeastern. Dr. Reagan, thank you so much for being here tonight. It's such a pleasure to have you.
No, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate being here.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask the audience if they have questions or when they have questions, just to put them into, my goodness, the question and answer box. And I will be monitoring that throughout the presentation, and I will just gently interrupt you as I get them, okay? So tell me, aside from having lived here, why did you decide to come to Waltham as superintendent?
Yeah, well, actually, that's one of the biggest pieces was my my history in the city. So, I saw the position was posted, and I thought to myself, geez, I don't know if I'd have a shot. It's a big district. It's a more urban district than I've ever worked in, and I've only got a couple of years of central office experience. And I said, what the heck? You miss all the shots you don't take, so go for it and see what happens. And what sort of really pushed me there, as I said, was what Waltham was to me as a student myself. So I left the city when I went to college and never returned to live here. I lived in Massachusetts my whole life, but not back in Waltham. So I've lived in Waltham less time than I have not. But the years that I was here was really formative for me. There were some really incredible teachers that had huge impacts on my life. And some of them I'm still in contact with today, which is just amazing. And it just goes to show you how much of an impact they had. Some of them reached out to me when I got the job to congratulate me and all that. And a lot of those teachers focused around the music program, which, as you said, I started my career as a music teacher. I knew from middle school that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to teach music because the people that had influenced me the most so far in my life as teachers were music teachers. So oddly enough, I achieved that goal. And after just a few years, school leadership opportunities started to come up, and I took those, and I ended up leaving the classroom many years before I thought I would. But I was glad I was able to do that. So the drawback for me was this idea of kind of going back to where my trajectory as an educator was set, and to see if there's, if I could come full circle in a way and come back and contribute back to this district that gave me such a solid footing to have what I've felt has been a really rewarding and an enjoyable career.
Well, you picked a very interesting time, change jobs and come into a new system right smack dab in the middle of a pandemic.
That's true. That's true. And I was appointed by the school committee on February, I think, 27th. And it was about 3 weeks prior to everything shutting down. At that point, we had no idea what was about to come. And the rest is history, as they say. And as I tell people all the time, I'm not even sure if I'm getting used to the actual superintendency as a job, or if it's just everything is so colored by the pandemic right now. It'll be interesting when it's behind us to see what this role actually entails, I think, more so than what we're doing now.
Well, let me ask you a couple questions. I may have mentioned to you before, my babies are in their 50s. I don't have children in the public schools now. What has been kind of the timeline and the effect of the pandemic and your experiences with it?
Yeah, and I will say, back when it originally started, I was still in another district, but it's interesting at that time, I was finishing in Wilmington, heading into Waltham, so I was able to kind of monitor both districts' responses last spring, and they were very similar. And I think most districts, when it first happened back in March a year ago, we weren't sure how long we were going to be closed for, right? So it was a 2-week time frame. Then it became a month and 6 weeks, and then we found out it was for the rest of the year. And as a result, we were kind of playing catch up with how we were going to handle instruction. And I know Waltham and Wilmington were doing some of the same things, trying to get teachers to, if you will, kind of build an airplane as they flew it, because schools were not set up to be remote academies in any way. And we were asking these folks to become online instructors without any real preparation, and in some cases without even the tools that they needed. So I see that as sort of the first, the first phase. It was just getting us to the end of the year and trying to close things out and doing the best we can for kids. And then the summer, when I started in July, phase 2 was all about heavy planning. We spent, all of those weeks finishing up the reentry plan or the reopening plan for the fall. I presented something to the school committee in July, recommending that we reopen in a full hybrid model, which would bring everybody back in cohorts, half and half, so we could have our buildings less than full capacity. And the school committee decided that that wasn't what they were comfortable with, so they voted to go with a plan B, which is largely what we operated in from September all the way through March, which was our preschool students, our kindergarten students, and our first grade students back in a hybrid model, and all of our other grades back staying remote. And we had some of our higher needs students back as well, some ELL students, some of our special education students, but for the most part, our district was remote. And then in March, after we had gone through the second surge and the city numbers were very concerning, shortly after the holiday break, we started to see some relief. And, the metrics we were watching were getting better. And we were able to bring back grades in March. Each week we brought back another group. And so by the end of March, we were essentially hybrid pre-K through 12. With still about 1,000 students in the district that chose to be full-time remote. So they're in what we call Waltham Schools Online, which was a separate program we set up to accommodate those families. But the remaining 4,200, 4,500 families, students rather, were back hybrid. And then the last piece was the commissioner's edict, the Commissioner of Education, that we would have all students in the state, kindergarten through 5th grade, back full in person as of April 5th. We complied with that. So since the beginning of this month, now we're in our second week, we've had all of our elementary students back in full classrooms, and we're scheduled to do the same thing for our middle school students on the 28th of April. And no word yet on high school. We're waiting for some more guidance from the state. So that's been sort of the trajectory of this as we've gone along. But I will add one other thing. A big chunk of this in the summer and into the fall was teacher training. And I have to tell you, I've been in many online classes, and teachers are just doing amazing work in that environment. And in comparing what you saw in classrooms last spring when this first happened to what was happening in the fall is night and day. They really stepped up and learned to be instructors in a totally different way and embraced it. And our kids were very lucky to have that case. So it's just some things we've learned from the pandemic that we definitely would want to continue as we go forward. But so that's what brings us here now.
That was a very quick ramp up, actually.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that everybody understands just how challenging it was for you. Now, I have another question here. Not everybody in Waltham is advantaged. We have a number who are sheltered, number of families are sheltered, some are disadvantaged, may or may not have the equipment or the Wi-Fi. What systems have you put into place to reach these folks?
Sure. That's a great question. And one of the things we've been fortunate to benefit from, like many districts, is federal dollars that have come in as relief for COVID. So we've used a lot of our federal aid to purchase the equipment that you were talking about. So making sure that we have a device. In our case, we use Chromebooks to make sure that we have enough of those so that every student can have one in their hands. We actually deployed everything that we owned practically back in the spring to get us through there. We didn't collect them over the summer because it just would have been too much and to do that. But we knew that we needed more. Some of the devices were aging out. We still had grade levels that didn't have enough. So we put effort into purchasing those devices. Second step was to make sure that they could access the internet with those devices, because we do have many families that did not have an internet service provider. So we purchased items called hotspots, which, we purchased them with a certain amount of data so that it was no cost to families, and we were able to sign those out to families as well. So they were able to access their online classes using our devices and our hotspots. So, and as the year has gone on, where we've seen a need, we've purchased additional pieces of equipment to make sure that all of our kids are able to connect. And that, of course, in a diverse city like Waltham, it's one of your biggest challenges to make sure that everyone has equitable access. And that's always been a priority of ours.
Okay. My goodness, I apologize for the dog.
That's okay.
That's the
He agrees with
story
me.
of working from home. One of our members has a great deal of interest in dyslexia, particularly screening and early identification. And I was wondering what the school district is doing to address this.
Sure. So as some people may know, the state, there's a new law that was passed recently in the last couple of years, and the state has been working on some guidance for schools. And as usually is the case with the Department of Education, guidance tends to lag behind regulation changes. And it wasn't until close to the new year that we received some draft guidance finally from the state. And it had 9 chapters in it. And I think when they released the draft, only 3 or 4 of the chapters had words in them. The others were all blank. So again, it's just trying to keep up with them being behind. And then just recently, a week or so ago, we finally got the final copy of the guidance from the state. So we're very pleased about that. So in the meantime, what we've been doing, I think some folks think that we don't have any sort of system in place to identify potential students who potentially have dyslexia. We do have protocols in place, but it's not a universal screener, which is the next step that the state is requiring. So we've identified what that screener will be, and we're developing the rest of the protocols as we go along, and we'll have a full presentation for the public through a school committee meeting. I think it's May 7th. It's the first school committee meeting of May. We'll have a couple of our folks from our staff, not only special education, but ELL, regular education, literacy folks, because this new law really, takes the whole dyslexia identification piece and spreads it out across beyond special education, right? So making sure that we're not just looking at it through the lens of a learning disability of some kind, that we're making sure that we're treating this from a broader sense as a literacy issue that we want to support students with. So that's sort of the approach that we've been taking. Some of the other pieces that are in that legislation that we're looking at, of course, like I said, an early literacy screener for our youngest students to do in kindergarten. There's a whole multi-tiered system of support. This is a buzzword in education now. So they're asking us to have a blueprint for how we're going to support students on multiple levels. Thinking of tier 1 as sort of something that's available for all students, all the way up to the more restrictive tier 3, which would be significant accommodations and modifications to support individual students. So having that blueprint, that's something we're also finalizing now, that would be a part of our response to the dyslexia law. And then a similar blueprint for how we're supporting our ELLs, our English learners. So all of those pieces coming together to solidify our approach to this new requirement around a universal screener for dyslexia. So, we will be ready to apply that screener to next year's kindergartners. And, like I said, the tool has been identified, and now the process is sort of finishing up the protocols and making sure teachers are trained to use the tool, and we know how to read the data. Because one of the worries that a lot of educators have with this new law is that it would over-identify students with dyslexia, and we don't ever want to do that. We want to make sure if we are assessing students for any type of learning disability or condition, that we want to make sure that it's done appropriately, so that you have progress monitoring that happens after the initial screening. Keep in mind, we're screening kids at the beginning of their kindergarten year, where they're 5 years old, and many of them may come to school not yet knowing their letters. And you have to make sure, if you're doing a screener, that there's some level of progress monitoring to check back in and make sure that it truly is some level of the learning disability that you need to address. So I feel good about where we are with this right now. And if there's folks in the community that are interested in sort of our overall comprehensive plan, I'd encourage them to tune in to us on the 7th. And they can listen to our presentation and certainly send us questions if they have any after that.
You used the term over-identify. In my mind, I wasn't quite sure what you meant. Identifying students who don't have problems as having them?
So that's essentially what I mean by that, making sure that our processes is accurate, and we're not identifying someone that actually doesn't have dyslexia, but there's something else that's creating the issue. And we just want to be careful about that.
That sounds like a big challenge.
Always.
Yeah. Now, a continuing issue for the Waltham schools outside of the pandemic has been the very large number of students for whom English is not their first language. And I've heard varying views from different people from different aspects. The school's doing a good job, the school's not doing a good job, the teachers are happy, the teachers are unhappy. How can we continue to assure that these students are successful?
Yeah, I think one of the first things that we have to do is think about a mindset shift, in that I think there are some that look at the increasing number of students that are coming in that speak English as a second language, or may not speak English at all when they arrive, from a sort of deficit mindset. And I think we need to flip that around and always look at it from the positive. It's something that, in many ways makes Waltham an incredibly rich community from an ethnicity point of view, and it can be hard for folks that sort of don't see it that way. So we're trying a lot to sort of shift that mindset within our own organization, so people don't automatically consider a family who's coming in with English as a second language or no English at all as sort of a negative. And making sure that we're setting up our programs as such. So you are right in that the number has increased, exponentially over the last decade or so, and the city continues to be more diverse. And there are always challenges that come up when you've got students that need additional supports, right? Whether that be special education students, EL students, it doesn't matter, right? Every kid needs something slightly different. And that's really one of the biggest challenges overall, I think, for school districts right now. You can't have a one-size-fits-all approach, and that can be challenging. So, we have a really talented woman in charge of our EL programming now, in Dr. Sarah Hermela. She's been in the district 2 years. She's got her eye on the program and looking for efficiencies and where we can do things more effectively for kids. One of the pieces of feedback I get a lot when I'm speaking with our families that are parents of EL learners, English learners, is that they feel like the program we have right now is too segregated, that their kids are sort of off separate and they're not with their peers enough. And the trick is finding the balance, because they do need some of that specialized attention so that they can gain the English skills that they need to be successful in school and beyond. And at the same time, part of learning that English is being with their English speaking peers. So, keeping them segregated into EL classes that are separate is not the best model. So it's finding the mix. And so, I think we continue to sort of refine that. And I know that's something that Dr. Hermela is looking at really closely. So, whether that means, in some cases, it means we need additional staffing. In some cases, it means we need additional programming. In some cases, it's looking at sort of a co-teaching approach to make sure that we've got, the supports we have in the class. And then beyond that, it's every time we're looking at teachers, it's considering candidates who are bilingual. That's something that if we continue to expand that within our district, it only deepens our bench for folks that can help support families as their children obtain English. What I've come to learn from being in various forums with our primarily our Spanish-speaking families in Waltham. There's many forums out there. I've been invited to them, and I've been happy to go. The common thread is that these are folks that are like everybody else. They just want their children to be in school. They want them to learn. They want them to be happy. They want them to be social, and they want them to be successful. And so I think, I approach it in this mindset that, okay, this is what these kids need, and we need to figure this out. And it's going to be shifting all the time. And it even varies from school to school in Waltham in terms of the demographics. So, being mindful of that as we go forward. So it's, everything's a challenge in education right now. There's no easy street for anybody. So I guess I wouldn't separate the EL as a separate challenge, just as it's just one of the pieces of running a public school right now that can be difficult to do, right? It's finding what every kid needs and tailoring that program to them.
Now, I have a very specific question that just kind of dovetails with what we're talking about now. If an ESL student shows symptoms of dyslexia, will the student stay in an immersion school or transfer to a school where the student could receive more intensive support with English?
Yeah, so I think that's where we come down to that individualized response to any type of testing that we do, and looking at, again, progress monitoring and checking back in and seeing where they are. So some students may require a more intensive program of some kind, and others may be able to receive whatever supports they need in the school that they're currently enrolled in. So it's a hard question to answer in a specific way, but just generally speaking, this universal screener will give us the opportunity to look at every student's data points individually and make those decisions based on what the scores are telling us.
Good. Another question. Can you describe, I almost feel bad asking this question because you've been in the district under strange circumstances, the pandemic, for less than a year, but we're going to give it a go. Okay. Can you describe what's happening in any of the vocational programs, and if there are any plans to expand them to be up to date and offer them to more students?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And that ties into, the new high school project, for example. At the core of that new building is our, what they call CTE programming, career technical education. And, as people that have lived in Waltham a long time know, several years back, when they closed the old vocational school, they brought the programs up to 617 Lexington Street. And that whole building is tired and old, and so are the shops, right? So there's not, it's not as state of the art as we would hope it would be. The new building itself has absolutely spectacular facilities for CTE programming. I'm just saying, once they have open houses and the community is able to come up and see this building when it's built, these are going to be the gems that we're going to walk people through. Mm-hmm. So everything from auto tech, which is going to have, 7 or 8 bays where we can be repairing cars, and to some new programming that we're adding for the new school. So we're expanding and adding cosmetology, which is a very popular program. Yeah. Paired with that, there will be a salon that will be open to the public, so that students can actually see both aspects of what it means to go into this profession. We'll be adding HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. That's a very popular program that we don't currently offer. So that will be added at the new school. This year we were approved for health assisting, which is a really exciting program, and that's at the current school, but we've been approved, so that will transfer. It's a new program, but it will transfer over with us to the new building. A programming and web development strand will be added, and then the last one we're looking at is environmental science. So we're trying to not only expand CTE, but expand sort of what people think of when they think vocational programs, the more traditional vocational programs, and the sort of newer side of CTE, which, 25, 30 years ago, we weren't thinking of environmental science or health assisting as a part of a voc tech program, but now they are very, very popular programs. So we're not only expanding, but trying to diversify. And the idea behind that is to get more kids interested and more kids involved. And the way the new building is designed, there's all of these programs are within different wings of the building. They're not sectioned off in one area anymore. So you've got your CTE programs right in the area where your other classrooms are. So our environmental science program is going to be right with our other science classrooms, and so that they can have easy access to exterior classroom space that they need to do their work. So there was a lot of thought put into that, and I had nothing to do with that, into the new building, but we will benefit from it, of course. But a lot of thought put into the design and where these programs would be, because the idea is, if you are in the HVAC program, that's not your identity. You're a Waltham High School student that's studying this particular tech track. And you're taking your academic courses with everybody else at the school. So that integration of CTE is a huge piece of the new building. And again, I mean, the culinary, there's going to be a restaurant that's open to the public. The early childhood care program is going to have a preschool that's going to be there that our kids will work directly with. So it's all really exciting to think that they'll be doing that kind of hands-on, real life work with the public, which not all technical programs are able to do. We don't do a whole lot of that because of our space issues now. So yes, I'm excited to say that CTE will expand, and that the programs are really going to be, the shops themselves are really going to be quite something to see in that new building.
I can just see you glowing about this.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing.
Be very exciting.
It is amazing.
Let's shift gears a bit.
Sure.
You've been invited by the League of Women Voters, and as you know, we're very involved in watching government, in looking at programs, at researching them. And given the experience of this country over the last 4.5 years, a bunch of us were saying, what in the world happened to civics education? Okay. And because I remember 11th grade, Mr. Trout taught us civics, and I still carry that knowledge with me all these years later. What's being done in the school system so that our students understand how things work and how our government runs?
So a couple of things come to mind when you asked that question. There was recently a pretty significant shift in the curriculum frameworks in Massachusetts for social studies. And what that did is it put a civics course as a mandate aligned with the standards in 8th grade across the state. So this was relatively new, last few years. So the 8th grade social studies curriculum for the state, and Waltham is in line with that, is a civics course. Prior to that, in 6th and 7th grade, there's a geography focus, but then they get into the civics focus for 8th grade. And then at the high school level, it's still, a work in progress in many cases, but trying to integrate an approach to history that isn't just so U.S. centric, but it's sort of U.S. in the world, and how, as you're learning U.S. history, how we related to the rest of world history at that time. So, in Waltham, we still have a very robust social studies elective program at the high school level too, where kids can take some really specific courses that tie into U.S. history and government. And that's really exciting for our kids. Everything, including a history of Waltham course that Mr. Cox has taught for a long time. And I think, for a community to have something like that, I think is really critical as well. Not only teaching our citizens about how state government works and how our federal system works, but they should learn about their own local community as well. And Waltham has a really robust history, and particularly when you think about the Industrial Revolution and all of that that ties into Waltham. I think it's really exciting. So it's good to see that happening as well. So, but the 8th grade piece, tied into that, there should be a sort of a project that they're doing as an element of that, so that they're kind of digging deep into the curriculum around civics. And it's not just sort of reading a chapter in a book and regurgitating facts. It's to try and get them sort of involved in their community through the course, whether it be through community service or projects or whatnot. And then the second part that I thought of when your question came up has to do just in general about our shifting towards more of a project-based approach to learning. Particularly at our elementary and middle grades, and now pushing forward at the high school with the new building. It's a key component of the education plan we designed for the new building. Because if we can take that focus and do things from a project-based approach, an interdisciplinary approach, then you can pick the topic of whatever it is, and it can be largely related to, civic engagement. And kids can, through like real life issues that are impacting them, they can dig deep into something and study it over a period of weeks across multiple courses. And that, I think, is really what's special about project-based learning, because it gives kids the chance to to learn a little bit more in depthly, as opposed to quickly going through a chapter and learning about this and then I'm moving on to this. It's more thematic, and it gives them a chance to kind of dig a little more deeply into a topic. So the good news is that the physics that you took in high school is there, but it's at a younger grade, in 8th grade, which I don't think is a bad idea, because these are 13-year-olds, and I think it's a great time for them to really engage with that topic. And we'll see how that takes us as that course develops over time.
I don't know if the audience knows that we speak before we have these meetings. Before I asked you to come on, we had a conversation. We looked over some issues that I might ask you questions about. Not so much that you do a whole lot of preparation. I mean, this is your job. You're just describing what you do every day, but so that we don't blindside you. But I have a question here, and I don't want you to feel that I've blindsided you.
Okay.
Because we haven't, no, it's not a bad question. It's just that we haven't discussed this, and it has more universal, not appeal, but reasoning behind it. I will read the question as it came up. Over the past year, the Black Lives Matters and other anti-hate movements coming to the fore, Waltham students have told the public some distressing and heartbreaking stories of their personal experiences with racism. Can you speak to what is being done in schools to address the experience in these issues? And I phrase it this way because this issue of racism and looking at others who are different is nothing new. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I could tell you stories from my childhood. It's nothing new. And I've done a lot of reading about implicit bias, which was fascinating. I was unaware of it before. And can you say anything to this topic?
Yeah, I certainly can. I mean, this is this is nothing new to the Waltham Public Schools, but of course, what we have seen across the country in the last 4+ years has really had a huge impact in general, and I think brought a lot of things that have been maybe not discussed as they should have been. It's brought them to the front of the line, appropriately so. The stories that I think that was in the question about people bringing stories to other people's ears. I've been I'll say the beneficiary of hearing these stories directly from students and adults in the district. And I say that because it's powerful to particularly listen to a student talk about feeling discriminated against, or feeling unaccepted, or feeling uncomfortable or scared to come to school. I mean, these are really compelling comments. This is really compelling commentary to hear coming from the mouths of kids, of our adolescents. Mostly it was high school students that I've been engaging with around these topics. And if you sit in the room and you hear these stories, it really makes you look deeply at your organization and to see, where is this stemming from? How is this happening? Who's turning a blind eye? And what can we do as a district to make things better? The first thing that I want to note, and I'm not looking to pass the buck in any way, but I think we all have to first recognize that this is always a community issue, not just a school issue.
Absolutely.
As such, we need to find ways to partner as a school and a community together to address these issues. And we can do all we want at schools, and if the rhetoric is still being repeated to kids at home, they're going to come back and still do the same sort of harmful things that they may be doing in school on a regular basis. From the school perspective, a lot of our professional development, our professional learning, our focus on curriculum, our focus on hiring has been around the idea of equity. There's been a series of professional developing offerings that we have done over the past several years. Again, I've only been here for 1 year, but whether it be bringing in guest speakers or having opportunities for teachers to participate in multi-day programs or programs that last over several months or several weeks, we take advantage of every one of those that we can and engage our teachers in that. Because it starts with the adults in the building, making a safe place for kids and giving the adults, all of us, including me, giving us the skills we need to handle a situation when it comes up right in front of us. You hear a word, you see a student behaving in a certain way. How do you react? Because they look right at us. And if our reaction is to walk away because we're uncomfortable or that we don't know what to say, then that gives them the sense that it's okay and that I'm not safe here because this person did nothing to stand up for what was happening, and what was happening was wrong. So there's a lot of work still to be done to get our adults in a place where everybody feels that they can do the right thing when they have to, and that they can be aware of their own implicit biases, which is hard to to accept and to manage yourself. I'm in that same category, and understand what privilege is and how not to ignore that privilege that comes with being a certain color or a certain gender or a certain sexual orientation, and that's challenging. In multiple cases this year where we've had things arise and we've had to have difficult conversations, or something has come up in a class and the teacher has been put in a situation where they've tried to address it. The feedback is often mixed. We have some parents that are thanking us for having the hard conversations, and others that are angry that we're even talking about this and saying things like, I lived in Waltham 30 years and I've never seen a single instance of racism. And I just can't buy into that comment, because as wonderful as a community as it may be, there is no community that is perfect. And to say that you don't see that is meaning that you're not paying close enough attention, and or you're sort of refusing to see it. So there's a lot more work that has to get done, and this is going to be ongoing, no question. And I know that there are community organizations out there that are eager to continue to partner with us, and we just have to find ways to keep the lines of communication open. I will say, from the curriculum standpoint, we have made some pretty significant shifts around curriculum to ensure that our curriculum is multicultural, and making sure that kids can see themselves in the material that they're working with, that the topics, as hard as they are, it's not whitewashed, and that we're addressing them appropriately. I was in a fourth grade class at an elementary the other day, and they're studying segregation. And so, all the students had a series of books on their desks that were addressing this issue in a variety of different ways, embedding it into U.S. history. And these are hard topics. And you look around the room and you see many different students of many different races sitting together studying this topic. And that's hard to do when you're 9, 10, 11 years old, and particularly for the teacher in this current environment. Our elementary literacy curriculum is all about that. It focuses on difficult but important topics. Tied into that, our specialists at the elementary school, our music program has a unit that talks about music's influence on social justice. So, and again, not a lot of districts will do that, but that's something that we're focusing heavily on. At the high school, looking at some texts that you and I probably read when we were in school that, represent a lot of white European authors, and diversifying those texts so that we're including, authors that are Asian, authors that are African, authors that are South American, Central American, so that, again, kids are seeing authors that look like them, hearing stories that they can relate to from their own lives, or their lives of their parents or grandparents. So, and that's not easy. Tradition is hard to break. And you've got a lot of people that say, well, why would you get rid of this book? It's been good for 60 years. Well, you've got to approach it with a different mindset and understand that, change can be good, and you're bringing a whole different perspective to kids, and, building a whole new sort of respect for diversity and equity and all of that. And then the last piece I would just mention is, when we come down to hiring, this is one of the most critical things that we can do, is we're hiring educators in our district and leaders in our district, to not just hope that we have a diverse pool, but be proactive to try and ensure that we have a diverse pool. And really, we've got a population of students that's about, 41% Latinx, and we've got a teaching staff that's about 88% white. So, trying to get a balance, something that mirrors our population a little more, and with each opportunity to hire a new staff member, we have a chance to diversify, and I think that's really critical for us to do as well. So, there's a lot of elements to this question, and there's no real easy answer to it, other than this is sort of at the core of what we talk about. It drives our discussions. I know there's some that don't believe this to be true, but it absolutely is. Every conversation I'm in about every element of the work we're doing in this district, this idea of equitable approach and equitable education, equitable instruction, pedagogy, it's constantly at the center of our discussions. And the pandemic has really highlighted that even more, because we know that that COVID has impacted has impacted largely Black and brown families much more than white families, and that we've seen that in our own student body, and trying to be sensitive to that and how we support those families through what can be a very challenging moment in time for them. Imagine trying to navigate the system to get yourself vaccinated if you don't speak English at all, or it's not your first language. And so as a school, I think we do a lot to try and make sure that we are that conduit for those families as well, to say, look, we're here to help you. We're your neighborhood school. You can come to us and we'll point you in the right direction. So that's a long-winded circular answer there, but there's a lot to unpack, I think, with a question like that.
Absolutely. And I've got a comment here. Your approach to acknowledging and understanding the issues involving racism, your willingness to tackle this speaks well for the future of Waltham schools.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's shift gears a little bit. If I were to give you a blank check, and you could, but have to use it for the schools.
Okay.
No running away for an eternal vacation where it's warm and sunny all the time. But if I gave you a blank check and absolute authority, what would you do?
So I think many superintendents might jump right away to facilities, because that's often, I need a new school, I need that and the other thing.
You're getting that. We're
getting that, right? So Waltham's in really good shape in that respect. Once the high school's built, we have ourselves a really nice portfolio of buildings. So that's a great thing. If I had a blank check and was able to make some adjustments right now, I would put most of the funding into additional supports around social emotional health and well-being and learning. And I say that because there's a lot of rhetoric out there about all the things kids have missed because of COVID. And often when we talk about schools, what we talk about them missing is academics. They're not learning. They're not with, and I would say that this idea of learning loss is, it's a bit of a misnomer, because I think, to say kids haven't been learning, and I know there are some the remote has not worked for, right, and they have had trouble with access. That's absolutely true. But the programming we've put forward, I think has minimized sort of that idea of learning loss. What I'm more worried about is the mental health of our students, and what being in isolation essentially has been for them for the last 13 months. So if I had that check, it would be to add additional school adjustment counselors at buildings, to perhaps add professional development for social emotional learning, because SEL, which is another buzzword now in education, in order to be effective, really needs to be something that's just simply integrated. You can't have an SEL block in the day. I mean, you can, but that's not the best way to do it. To say, well, for this 30 minutes, we're going to do a mindfulness moment, and we're going to, that's all great stuff. But ideally, you're training all of your teachers to approach their instruction through a mindset of SEL. And that takes a lot of time, effort, and resources to get them trained to do that. So that, that elementary student that might see 2 or 3 teachers in a day, if they have specials, there's a common thread that they get that gives them that social emotional safety when they're in their class, and they're learning strategies that all of their teachers are reinforcing about how to be healthy emotionally. So when I think about loss, it's not the learning loss, it's the social emotional well-being of kids, and what it's like for them to come back in these schools. There were kids in March when we rolled them back into school at the elementary level. It was an example of a little girl that came into her school and literally started to cry. And when the principal said, "Are you okay?" she said, I just haven't been here for a year. She had this emotional reaction to coming back to her school, where she's missed her friends and her teachers, and that's real. I mean, these kids are really hurting. And so that's the area where I would put the most resources that I could if I had extra to place. And we are doing some of that through our federal dollars that we're getting, and through our budget that the school committee recently approved, that will go to the city council in a few weeks' time. Our focus really was around how can we provide additional social emotional supports for our families and our kids, families, and our staff, because they need to be well taken care of as well.
Okay. I thought that would end the session, but I got another question here for you.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to shift gears yet again. What's your take on MCAS? It's become very controversial. Many educators have spoken out against it. And if you don't want to answer, I would understand.
I'm perfectly so I'll say this. I happen to think, so let's take COVID off the table for a minute. Wouldn't that be nice if we really could? In a pre-pandemic world, I think the MCAS is a decent tool. I think Massachusetts had one of the better tests to assess, student achievement and growth. And so the idea of testing kids using that tool, I never disagreed with that idea. How the data was used, there were some questions around that. I prefer the growth data more than the achievement data myself, because I think the achievement data is always this sort of autopsy approach, right? We're looking at how the kids did. The year is over. Now what do you do? We're moving on to the next year. So it's kind of hard. It's not a formative assessment. It's a summative assessment in that respect. But growth data can be really helpful, because you can see how an individual student grew in a year based comparing to their peers. And that can be really useful data to use. I will be honest, with COVID happening, I think the best decision was to not test kids last year. And I wish that were the decision again this year, because I think where the data itself is going to be so skewed, because kids have been learning in different ways, and we've made adjustments, and the year was shortened. We started 10 days later than we normally would. We've had, disruptions because of, rolling back into in-person learning. When kids are back in school, people don't often understand, but because they're wearing masks, we need to take time out for them to have mask breaks. So you're losing instructional time. Lunch takes 15 minutes longer because you've got to bring the kids in shifts, and you've got to make sure that they're spaced. So you're losing instructional time. And to hold us to that standard, I just don't feel it's good for anybody, and to give kids that stress. The state did announce that elementary students and middle school students can have the option to take the test remotely. They've not yet really given us all we need to know in terms of how that's going to work, because they'll have the devices at home, but it's going to be a secure website that they go to. So it's just logistically a nightmare. And at the secondary level, the high school level, where they have what they call a CD, a competency determination, that's the mandated test to get your diploma. Last year's sophomores, and that's the year that you really take the English and math. They didn't take it, and so they were slated to take it as juniors, and they recently just announced that they did not have to take it as juniors. They'll take it as seniors. They're not off the hook, but they don't have to. They can opt in because there is a scholarship component to that. If you get a certain score, you can get some scholarship money for the state, for state colleges and universities. So juniors can opt in, but they don't have to. But the current sophomores are still right now slated to take this test. And we don't even know what the plan is to get everybody back to school yet. So they're still at the high school, they're still hybrid. So we would have to offer the test in 2 sessions, because we've got half the kids in 1 week and the other half the other week. So, and I still have to ask myself what the purpose is, and whether or not the data they're going to get from that is going to be useful to anybody. And I'm not so sure about that. So that's my personal opinion. It matters not at all, because it's
The state told you what you
my pay
do.
grade, but we obviously will do what we're required to do. But I did want to mention for any parents that are watching that if you have younger students, and they're learning from home because they're in our online program, that their option will be there for them to take the test at home, because there were some concerns about pushing kids into the building that have chosen to be home. I don't know what that looks like for sophomores right now, because that will be a struggle, because there's no at-home option for high school students, at least at this point.
Well, I'm absolutely certain that Waltham's not the only community that has to face these, and answers will come down and accommodations will surely be made.
Of course.
Dr. Reagan, I can't tell you what a pleasure it has been to spend this time with you. I got some kudos coming in on the questions and answers. You've impressed the audience quite a bit. And let me also say to you, the League of Women Voters of Waltham is composed of a group of very engaged people who are interested in what's going on in the schools, who are more than willing to come if we can help you in any way. Or I can rephrase it by saying, I grew up during the civil rights movement. You want me to talk to somebody about it? I'll be more than delighted to. And I have a whole bunch of other people very much would like to help if you need us.
That's great. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your attention and your questions, and we will see you here the next time. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.